So I have a question. Do you feel like you know why you get triggered when you get triggered? Like, do you know where a lot of your emotional reactions come from? Because I think a lot of us chalk it up to being like, oh, because I have trauma and I just need to heal it. And I think that's true. But I also think that that might be like a really big blanket statement and it doesn't allow us to be more specific. And I also think that that makes us feel more shameful about when we get triggered. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about how to take our triggers, understand them, and turn them into standards and boundaries that we can purposely enact in our lives, even before we're totally healed. Totally healed. Okay, let's get into it. So basically, I think it's okay, and I think it's actually really important to not just look at every time you get triggered and go, like, God, I just have to heal. I think it's important to look at our triggers and think, is this something I exactly do not want? Can I decide, okay, to set the standard, I don't want this behavior? Because once we fully decide that, we don't constantly have to be on defense. We can just sit in the fact that we know this is what I don't want. I no longer have to wait for the anger to tell me whether or not I'm correct. I don't have to validate it as much by constantly being angry. I get to decide this thing makes me upset, and that's okay. I think it's important to define what triggers us because sometimes we may not realize it. Like, I think there's some things that are super obvious and we're like, okay, I don't want that behavior. But sometimes we like shut down, we freeze, we shrink, we feel in our bodies that something doesn't feel right. But in the moment, we may not be able to name it. So I'll give you an example from what's been happening in my life lately. Like, I have been kind of friends with a couple of people. They're still kind of new, but like a couple of people. And I kept realizing that I felt uncomfortable around them and I couldn't define why. And I sort of lightly knew, but I didn't know if I could believe myself. And that's another piece of it. Sometimes you are so used to not believing in yourself or not taking your feelings seriously because you've been told you're reactive, whatever, like that it may be hard to reconnect to whether or not you believe your body. And for me, I was kind of like, I'm not quite sure, but I don't feel comfortable. So I stopped talking to these people for a little bit. And then they were like, hey, why? And I did kind of a little bit of like, internal exploration. And I was like, oh my God, I see that I feel like they're really judgy. I feel like they're really gossipy. And I didn't want to think that because I thought they were people who were also really helpful. But I mean, obviously, we've seen before really helpful people can be judgy. And so it triggered me because I was like, oh my God, they are like, now I love my family, but they're like my mom and my sister. So they are, my mom and my sister are the type of people who are really like competitive. They compare people a lot. Like, I remember this is a huge trigger for me. Like, I would have years of holidays, of Christmases, of Thanksgivings where my mom, my sister, and some of my cousins would dominate the conversation. And the conversation would mostly be about talking about other people. A lot of the times our relatives and how they're not doing that well and how they're making poor choices. And it was like, here's the thing. When you talk with friends, you are inevitably going to talk about other people sometimes because you need to vent, because you need support. But you can tell the difference between like that and just talking to be gossipy, to be, talking in a negative way. And so I just like, it kind of took me back to like when I would just kind of shut down and I wouldn't say anything or interact as much during holidays because the conversation was like, this person like made a really poor choice. I can't believe they're moving. I can't believe they got that car. And I would just sit there going like, guys, it's Christmas. I don't want to have this conversation. Why are you talking about this right now? And I just realized like so much of my interactions with my mom and my sister, like when I'm alone and there's silence, like to fill the silence, they're like trying to make conversation by talking shit about somebody else. And like it was so funny. Like I had to drive my mom to her eye surgery the other day, and we were kind of silent for a while, and my mom was like, you know what annoys me about your father?" And I was like, is that how you fill your silences all the time? And I realized with these people that I was starting to be friends with, like I noticed that that was kind of how they were. And when I wanted to talk about other things, like they kind of like changed the subject. And so, but I didn't consciously understand that until later. But I kind of knew like, I don't like this. I don't want to talk to them as much. I'm not that conscious as to why. And so afterwards, I realized it. And so I had to admit to myself, like, I was not purposely choosing the type of people I'm interacting with. Like, I was not purposely deciding, oh, right away, I don't like this. I don't want to interact with it. And so this was kind of like randomly triggering for me because I decided to not really like speak or interact with these people anymore. And I told them why. And it was triggering for me because I realized every time I had to tell my mom and my sister what bothered me, they wouldn't listen. And I still had to be tied to them because obviously they're my family. And on the whole though, I love them and they're my, like, but I have to have boundaries with them. And in this situation, I was allowed to stop it. Like I'm allowed to with my family too, but I chose not to. But with these friends, I was allowed to just be like, okay, this, I don't need to continue a relationship. And I got to finally be like, this is a no. And there was a really interesting moment where I was like I was even telling my therapist, I was like, I'm having a hard time allowing myself to believe that I get to have the boundary and I get to say completely no to people. Like, as in, I get to just cut them out immediately. And she was like, because I was asking her, like, do you think that that was too much? Do you think that I was overreacting? And she was like, well, this isn't for you, right? Like, you don't want that kind of interaction. I was like, no. But I do kind of want to be friends with people who are like, because they were kind of in the healing space. I do want to be friends with people in the healing space, but just not them. And she was like, well, that's okay. And there's going to be more people. And it's funny because I've obviously cut off other people before. Like I've ended other friendships before that weren't for me. But I don't think when I was younger that I consciously did it knowing that it was because it was based on a boundary. It was based on something I didn't want. I think that I cut it off without consciously understanding why. And so I think this is important because, again, we may have a feeling that something doesn't sit right with us. We may not be able to communicate it either. And I think it's okay to dig into it and go, it's okay that that directly relates to a childhood trauma. And objectively, it doesn't mean that on the whole, like, everyone should stop doing whatever, should stop being friends with those people or have the same exact boundary. But for you, because it's not right for you and also not right for what you're trying to heal right now, it's okay to have that boundary. So I think that I was also really triggered by these people because even though they were like in the healing space, like they also seemed to be like projecting their advice and their thoughts a little bit too strongly without asking me what was right for me first. And I think that's kind of like, depending on the dynamic and what you're learning and everything, I think it can be confusing. I don't know if you resonate with this, but even in like a healing, like personal development space, like we can give each other advice, but I noticed like kind of subtly that they weren't exactly asking me how I feel about things and like what feels the best to me. And it bothered me because I was like, we're in like a healing space. I think you should ask a person what's right for their bodies. And then it hit me as well, obviously, like it is a wound for me to feel disconnected to my needs and like having other people tell me what my needs are. And I mean, I've had a ton of things like childhood trauma and also in my health where I have felt like I knew something was right for me and I spoke on it a lot. Like I was already like getting the sense of like my hypermobility for a while up until I was like in my early 30s and I finally got a diagnosis that I was hypermobile. But for years, I went to physical therapy and I'd be like, this doesn't feel right. And the physical therapist would be like, I think you're just too sensitive. I think that you're thinking too much. And obviously, like I built up now this trigger to the phrase like you're too sensitive or any sort of phrase that's like you shouldn't believe yourself. Because after years of speaking on how I feel and being shut down, I finally got confirmation that I was like, no, I was right about my body the entire time. And there has been so much of that where, like, especially being someone who's like, I'm kind of intuitive, like, I'm really sensitive. Like, I had to shut down a lot of my sort of like, honestly, my feminine side, going back to my mom and my sister, they are very hyper masculine, I feel like, which isn't a bad thing if you feel like that's right for you. But I think for them, they made it really competitive. And like, for me, like I ended up being like, okay, well, I have to be like them to sort of like survive in this dynamic. And I realized like I just fully disconnected with what was right for me. And I'm like tired of doing that and also just generally tired of someone being like, I know better than you about your body. Because I can tell the people that I trust are the ones who are like who pretty obviously are like, no, we've been there. Like, no, I get that shit is hard. Like, I have seen shit be hard. I understand that your feelings are hard and the feelings are telling you something. Like, the people that I follow and interact with now, I'm like, I trust you because you're not just telling me to like just fix everything. You're telling me that the dark and the light are happening at the same time. You know what I mean? And that things balance out. People that I still follow are people that I'm like, okay, I trust you because I can tell that you've been there. I can tell that you get it. And like with these people, I feel like, do you like how I'm like, I have like a headache? I was like a headache because I was like, you sort of are saying things that I believe, but you're also not really listening to me. You kind of sound like you're just wanting to sort of sound like you're a guru, but either way, I was like, these are not the people I want to talk to. And I think there was a lot of frustration that I had because I realized later that I felt like they were kind of like probing me and almost really curious to get the tea of like what was going on. And again, it's okay to care. Like, so there's a difference between that and just kind of being like, yeah, but I have a, like very, like, make it about you. But there are people who do that come from a genuine place of like, I want to see what's happening. And then there are people who are like, I don't know how else to put it. I just had that facial expression. But there are people who are like in your, like, who kind of push you to be like, but I want to know all the tea about you. And so I need to like, like, and I just kind of decided that wasn't for me. And I also hated it because there was a bit of it that was kind of like passive, that was kind of indirect. And so all of this stuff, I realized I wanted to have more standards around because I decided this is what I don't like. I don't like super gossipy people. I don't like indirectness, passiveness. I do not like when someone decides they know better than you and when they don't like take you seriously or want to ask, what is right for you first. Like, I think that's pretty standard. Like, I think hopefully that goes for a lot of people, but I realized that there are so many people that operate in this sort of like pushy, judgy, gossipy, like I know everything sort of way, but they make it sound like, but I'm here to help you. Okay, so aside from the huge trauma triggering things, I think it's important to define some of the things that are our pet peeves that just annoy us. So for me, this is kind of a really a really funny example, but I remember being in college, and this is something that I think a lot of people do when they're younger. But like, I remember there was something, I think it was a Frank Ocean album that came out, and I was obsessed with like one or two songs. And I was playing just those two songs over and over again. And that's kind of what I do, now even, where I'm like, I think I obsess over one song for like months at a time. And then I kind of move on, and then maybe I'll listen to the rest of the album. But I remember in college, there was like a group of people that I was around who really emphasized like, you have to listen to the whole album within the first 2 weeks or else you're a fake fan. I think that people do that in general. They tell each other like, you're supposed to like this thing this exact way. This is how you were a fan. And for me, I was like, are you guys serious? Music is art. You can't tell me how to emotionally resonate with something correctly and at what time frame I'm supposed to do it in. It's just the funniest thing, and it's also just such a I was going to say it was such a like teenage like college person or whatever thing to do, but I think this is what adults even do now, like with their sports teams or whatever. Like, we call each other out on how to enjoy the things that we love. And especially when it comes to music, like, you can't tell me what resonates with me. That is directly tied to emotions. That's directly tied to like whatever I want to feel and vibe with. Please police me on safety though. Like, tell me I'm not driving right. Tell me you don't feel safe because something doesn't feel like it abides by the law or something. But police that. Do not police the way that I interact with something and how I interact with like art or things that I love. Like, especially don't tell me like I have to listen to an album within 2 weeks of it coming out or else I'm not a real fan, especially if I got to it late. It's so funny because that sort of thing has always bothered me. But you see how that has a direct relation to what I was talking about before, where I just don't like when someone tells me how I'm supposed to feel correctly. What's the appropriate way I should feel about something, especially not how I should like something that I like, you know? And that goes back to me not liking the super like group acceptance rules, social rules, and just knowing that you're not gonna be considered a real fan of something that you love because you didn't love it on the same timetable as somebody else is fucking ridiculous. But this is the sort of thing that is such a pet peeve of mine because I've always thought I get annoyed when people create rules out of something that doesn't need any rules at all. Like, they create like barriers to social acceptance for no reason, except for I want to be someone who knows music best. Like, I remember, do you see how much this annoys me? I think this always annoyed me because I remember being in that friend group in college and someone being like, oh, you can't like Aaliyah as much as this girl does because she's the one that likes her the most because she always talks about her. And just like as somebody in college and, in high school and stuff too, I remember being like, why, like, wondering why we needed to gatekeep these things and have like a hierarchy of who likes the thing the best. And I think even then I realized I don't want to be friends with people like that. And I think in general that makes sense. But I also think for me, it's a huge pet peeve because it also deeply violates how much I believe I resonate with things emotionally, despite what other people think is correct. But you could also look at that thing, like you don't have to be triggered by it or have that be a huge pet peeve like I do. Like, I think a lot of people who aren't super triggered by that kind of thing but don't believe it are probably like, I don't care. Like, like I think a lot of people would look at that same sort of thing and be like, bitch, I don't care. Like, do you? But I obviously was visibly annoyed by it. So that's how you know that was a pet peeve / trigger of mine. And I realized that like friend groups that are like that have unnecessary gatekeeping rules are not what I like. Okay, so hopefully my story times helped. I think it is really important to write down or to like be aware of what your pet peeves are and what your triggers are, because eventually they'll turn into things that like you don't have to sit in huge reactivity about anymore. Like when you really understand like solidly your values, your boundaries, your standards for what you want, you don't have to sit in like confusion or triggered states for too long because you already know what bothers you and you can decide to move on. Okay, well, till next time, peace, love, bye.